Fed's been a postdoc with me for 3.5 years after doing his PhD in London with Dayan, and he's been working on developing novel, innovative tasks that should elucidate the social interactions and the apparent patterns in social interactions that we observe in borderline personality disorder specifically. So, welcome to this extended group meeting, and I leave the floor to Fede.
Thank you. So I'm very excited to be here and to share with you my work for this that I've done through my postdoc with Chris. And this talk is going to include these novel paradigms. So I'm first going to introduce you to what borderline personality disorder roughly is and why mentalization is relevant to gain purchase into this disorder. And then I'm going to give you a quick overview of preliminary results that we have from 2 tasks. The 2 tasks are very different from each other, as you will see. And okay, so let's start it off. Oops. So this is more or less the roadmap for this talk. I'm going to introduce you, then I'm going to talk about the 2 tasks. The first one is, has been through different iterations of names, and now I've kind of settled on mentalizing card game or card game. And then the second one is the second version of a dancing task. There has been a version 1.0, of course, and we're working on a manuscript now because that one's already being carried over and data collected and analysis performed. So let's start with an introduction. So what is mentalizing? Mentalizing refers to people's ability to reflect upon themselves and others in terms of intentional mental states. Intentional mental states, what does it mean? Feelings, beliefs, wishes, and desires. So as you can imagine, if I go and reach for a knife, what am I going to do with it? You know, if I'm a chef, I might be wanting to use that knife to cut some veg or some meat, but in another context, this could be a very worrisome action that I'm performing. So inferring the hidden states in people's minds when they're performing actions is actually a crucial problem. It's actually a very important problem that we need to be able to solve for survival as a social animal. So it is an ability that we develop very early in our lives, and it is clinically known that this ability is disrupted in personality disorders. So people with personality disorder, not just borderline personality disorder, have difficulty understanding what's behind other people's actions, have difficulty gaining access to that. What is borderline personality disorder? It's also called emotionally unstable personality disorder. That depends on whether you read it in the DSM or ICD. And it's a highly prevalent and burdensome clinical condition. People diagnosed with BPD suffer immensely, and in fact attempt suicide 50 times more often than people that are not diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Symptoms include identity problems, so feelings of emptiness, anger issues and affective instability, chronically negative and unstable, especially intimate relationships, but also relationships in general, and episodes of self-harm. Now, the first time that I read this list, or the first time that I came across the symptomatology of borderline personality disorder, I was quite fascinated, because I thought these symptoms were kind of difficult to relate together. Why would you self-harm and have identity problems and have anger issues and engage in negative relationships all the time? Turns out that if you address mentalizing, all these things kind of start linking together and making sense. And in fact, a prominent theory that has been put forward by Peter Fonagy and Anthony Bateman posits that one of the problems with BPD, or the core problem with BPD, is difficulties in mentalizing. And this happens as a result of traumatizing, chronically negative relationships during childhood and perhaps elements of genetic vulnerability. So how, this is going to be very brief and very rough, but how does mentalizing arise? How do we form this, this ability? So imagine it arises very early on. So you have an infant and a caregiver in a dyadic relationship. So what happens is an infant has a first order representation of the self. So something is signaled at the level of the body, something like a homeostatic imbalance. You can call it that way. This is signaled to a primary caregiver with a preverbal expression. What happens then is that this caregiver has an internal model of the infant, trying to understand what the infant needs, wants, what's missing. And it does, what they do is a contingent display or mirroring an expression of understood affect. And that helps the infant build what is known as a second order representation of the self, as an internalized model of how the infant works, how their emotions should be managed and directed. And in fact, this internalized model serves to kind of independently, at a later stage, handle those first order representations of the self, those imbalances that happen pretty much every day in our lives. Turns out that we use this internalized model of the self, this mentalizing device, we use it also to understand others, to understand how emotions in the others, their displayed affect links onto, to understand how the others basically work emotionally and how they function. And what happens if something is wrong, such as in a traumatic or a chronically abusive relationship or neglect during childhood? What happens is that this part turns out to be missing some elements, turns out to be missing if the parent is neglects the child, or it turns out to be just biasedly negative if the parent is abusive. And this forms a divergence into the internalized model, and that means that this model that serves to direct and manage those emotions is ill-formed, which gives rise to all the symptoms that I talked about in the previous slide.
Would you mind minimizing just the window on the,
oh yes,
the left button? Yeah, that's fine.
One problem that arises when mentalizing is difficult is if someone does something harmful to me, I have to be able to understand whether they did it on purpose or not. And one difficulty that people with borderline personality disorder have is to establish this. Did someone hurt me intentionally? Did someone hurt me because they made a mistake? So imagine you're at an appointment with someone you know or don't know or barely know, and they turn out to be late, okay? As they are late, as the delay is building up, this forms a negative outcome for you. This is negative, obviously, because you're wasting time to do other meaningful things. As they come along, you have the choice to believe what they're going to tell you. You have the choice to believe that they were stuck in traffic, or you can choose to believe that they sort of did it intentionally because they don't really care about you. These are two interpretations, and they entail inferring a hidden state, okay? You cannot observe what actually happened. This is where priors about how these things work come into place, okay? And this is what turns out to be a problem, a severe problem in borderline personality disorder. So the motivation for this card game is exactly this one. Establishing the relationship between positive and negative outcomes and mentalizing. So why the card game? While mentalization has been central to modern understanding and treatment of BPD, empirical studies that address the way it influences learning and evaluation mechanisms in the social domain are lacking. So what is the goal of this game? To measure on a small scale of minutes how the appraisal of social positive and negative outcomes is mediated by the capacity to mentalize. and vice versa, how mentalizing is affected by social and positive and negative outcomes. So, I want to give you one example other than the anecdotes that I've given you so far. And the example is this one. And this example really incarnates what the task is all about. So it's very important. So imagine you are sitting at a dinner table and someone asks if they can have the salt because they want to season their dish. But someone at the other end of the table, I mean, this is obviously both coarse salt, but let's imagine that they're confoundable. And one is sugar and one is salt. I mean, this person is confused because they don't know which one is which, okay? And I don't know, they choose one. And turns out it wasn't salt, it was sugar. Their dish is ruined, okay? So what's gonna happen next? This guy has to imagine now that this person here was in doubt. They didn't know what to do. And they tried their best, but they made a mistake, okay? This is a way in which mentalizing now has mediated a negative outcome. And the appraisal of that negative outcome now has changed because this person was able to see that this guy didn't do it on purpose, okay? This is essentially the spirit of the card game. In the card game, you go through repeated interactions of passing salt and sugar, essentially. It's okay, because they got confused. So how does the card game work? The subject must provide an ambiguous message to Kai. So the ambiguous message is pass the salt, okay? And the outcome of each trial depends on what Kai makes of their message. So Kai is just a fictitious name, doesn't matter.
Well, actually here it's a real name, but...
Oh, right. Well, it turns out I tried every combination of 3 letters on Earth. Yeah. If you put 3 letters together, it's a name somewhere. It doesn't matter what you choose. Okay. If it sounds like it, it's probably a name. Okay. The subject observes an outcome from Kai immediately after they're offered to view the situation, i.e. Kai's hand, that led to the outcome, which allows them to establish intentionality. So I'm going to present results from a pilot online of 35 subjects that enter master and ordinary workers. And the questionnaires that I'm going to use for these results are the personality assessment interview borderline scores. There's also the reflective functioning questionnaire, but we're not going to see these results here, and the childhood trauma questionnaire, plus general demographics. Let's see. So the card game is quite complex in a way, because first, when you're playing each trial, you set up an expectation that you're going to win. And so that entails that there's going to be a prediction error when you get an outcome, okay? If the message that you send Kai is to do something very simple, then you're expecting that you're going to win the trial. If it's hard, then you're expecting that you're going to lose. And so when the outcome is going to come to you, then this is going to entail a prediction error. Now, what we're interested in this game is seeing how this prediction error and the problem that is created by it, or the joy that is created by it, is moderated by mentalizing. So let's make an example of this. So in this game, if you invest a sum, you either lose or win double that sum. So the card game works as follows. You have 4 cards, and these 4 cards can be triangle or square, yellow or blue. So you have a yellow triangle or blue triangle, yellow square, blue square. And you draw 2 cards at the beginning from the deck. Now, you go through repeated interactions with Kai in which you have to show Kai what you want them to play by giving them an example. But notice that each example that you're going to give to Kai is going to be inherently ambiguous, because you're going to give them both a signal for a shape and a color. So they will never know if you want a shape or a color in the card that they're going to play. Okay? At the beginning of each trial, the computer is going to tell you what you need to win the trial. So in this case, it's any card but a yellow square. But this hand is kind of tricky, because you get a yellow triangle, which has a color in common with what you don't want, and the blue square, which has the shape in common with what you don't want. And the assumption driving all this is that Kai will try to match as closely as possible the card that you show them. So first you show them a card, then they draw 2 cards as well, okay? And then they play a card that they think is the most similar to what you've played. I'm not telling people to have this assumption. People implicitly already have this assumption when they play this game, okay? When they have to show an example, they just show the closest thing to what I need to win the trial. So, 2 cards, and let's imagine that subject believes that Kai will try to help, and therefore sends a yellow triangle. So, Kai receives the yellow triangle. Remember that we don't want Kai to play the yellow square, but obviously Kai plays the yellow square. Sorry, this should be minus $10 because it's double the $5. So outcome is that, and Kai played the yellow square. But now what happens, okay? What happens is that we offer subjects the possibility to see what Kai's draw was. So we offer them the possibility to see the situation that led Kai to this outcome, okay? So we offer them the chance to, so first we give them the sheer outcome, creating that emotional response. After that, we tell them, look, but this is what Kai had. This is the hand that Kai drew. So can you understand why they did what they did? And in this case, Kai, so this is the hand that Kai drew from the cards. They had a blue triangle and a yellow square. And remember that the hint card was a yellow triangle, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. So when Kai saw that card, he could have played either one of these, because the yellow triangle has the color in common with the square and also has the shape in color with the blue triangle. But for me, it would have been better if they had chosen the blue triangle, right? That's my truth. I would have loved that because I would have won. But instead, Kai played that. This is where mentalizing comes into place, because I have a negative prediction error that I have to handle because I was hurt by Kai's decision, but I have to be able to see that they didn't do it intentionally. And therefore, when at the end of the trial I'm judging whether Kai was hostile or friendly, I have to take this into account. The measure by which, sorry, just a sec, the measure by which I take this into account is a measure of mentalizing.
So when you say you offer them the chance to see this this situation, do they have to actively choose to see this, or is it obligatory?
Great question. We thought about that. We thought about making it optional. We thought about making them pay to see the situation. But I think in the end we came to the conclusion that just always making them see what the situation was the best way to go. So they always see what Kai's draw was. Okay, let's move on. They don't just do this, by the way. At the end of every trial, they rate Kai's hostility or friendliness, okay? And then they also send them a smiley face as to show them how they feel. And I have to show you the task. If I have time, I will show you the task to show you how I decided to operationalize this. And then after that, obviously, a readout for the outcome of the interaction is how much they're going to invest in subsequent rounds, clearly, right? Because they lose faith in Kai, or they acquire faith, and then it's interesting to see that. This is a very preliminary model that we have for this task. So what we can do is to take all these elements together and look at how they contribute to the judgment of friendliness or hostility of Kai. P is the trial. J is the judgment of subject S. Okay, a bit too much notation, but I hope it's fine. So 50 is the midway of each rating. So they go from 0 to 100. Then there's a bias that depends on nothing at all. So maybe people just are biased to thinking everyone is hostile, okay, or friendly. Who knows? Then there's a part that depends on the sheer outcome from the interaction at trial T. So how much do I value just the outcome, if it's negative or positive? R of T is the feedback I get at T, so reward or punishment. This is a term, a prediction error term. So this is the actual outcome from the punishment, like here, from the trial. And this is the expected reward that I had, that I computed when I showed Kai my hint, and I knew what the goal of the task was. There can be three not the task, the trial. There can be three types of goals in each trial. They can be that you need an exact card for Kai to play, and that means you have low expectations to win, because obviously it's unlikely, just by chance, that Kai will draw that card. And the simplest of the goals is that Kai can play any card but one. And then there is all sorts of goals, such as scores and shapes. And those are kind of intermediate. This is how those expectations are computed. I'm not going to bore you with the details here, but just to see what the important thing to see here is how these probabilities are computed. They entail a logit or a softmax that has a temperature parameter here, and there are too many parentheses here. And then there's a similarity score for card 1 at trial T and a similarity score for card 2 at trial T. Okay, so these scores contribute to the this is the assumed temperature that you have for Kai's decisions. So the lower temperatures means that if there's a higher similarity score for one card, Kai will definitely go for that one. It's kind of the assumed model that you have for Kai here. If there's a high temperature, obviously, that means that Kai is very confused. These are just indicator functions. That means this is an indicator function that's saying that card 1 is winning at trial T, and that means that card 2 is winning at trial T, so that takes on values in between +1 and -1. So +1 if card 1 wins, -1 if it loses. So it's just very simply that. And all of it is multiplied by 2 times the investment amount. But the most important term in this regression is the probability of the choice. The probability of the choice is the mentalizing aspect of this. So if Kai plays something that I didn't expect them to play, and I have a large prediction error that's saying, you know, I lost and I'm very disappointed in that. That's one thing. But I should just maybe care about, if I'm mentalizing, I should just care about how likely the card that they played was given their hand, right? So once I see the situation that led to them playing a certain card, I should just compute, well, I would have done the same in their place. And it shouldn't matter at all what my expectations were to win or lose in this trial. So this is another term here. This is not a process model, this is a descriptive model, but it just allows us to look preliminarily at how all these elements go into the judgment of friendliness or hostility. So just to give you a summarizing view, a bias term that reflects my bias of hostility and friendliness for everyone in life, supposedly. That depends on just the outcome that I got. So if I get a negative outcome, I'm just going to say that they're hostile. And if I get a positive one, I'm just going to say that they're friendly. This depends on the outcome, but also on the probability that it had occurring given the goal that I had and the hint card that I gave. And this here, that doesn't depend on what I got. Okay, this doesn't depend on the reward or punishment that I got. It just depends on how likely it was. And that's our proxy for mentalizing, our measure of mentalizing in this task. This is just an example of the expectation and the way it is computed. I'm just going to skip over this now because I have a lot to talk about. So here, just from data, we can see that there are some people that follow the likelihood in their judgment, and some people that are just thinking about outcomes. So, for instance, let's say here we have someone that tends to say that people are pretty friendly, okay? But when they lose, they tend to give an average score for the friendliness or hostility, And they win, they think everything's fine. Just nearly 100. But there are some people that take that likelihood into account. So they're thinking, okay, this card, maybe I won or lost, but it was likely that they played that with the situation at hand that they had. So you can see that there are trends. So on the x-axis, you have the partner choice likelihood here. And on the y-axis, you have the judgment from 0 to 100. And you can see that some people definitely follow, for instance, here it's pretty clear. Some people follow the likelihood, some people don't. Actually, a lot of people don't. But okay, this is just a very simple schematic illustrating this. But obviously, we have to get the regression parameters to have better estimates. And what we see is something that we expected from literature. So these here are 4 subscales for the borderline severity of symptoms, as measured by the personality assessment interview. The BOA stands for affective instability. This is negative relationships, experience in negative relationships. This is identity problems, and that's self-harm severity. What you can see is people that have been in negative relationships, people that have experienced negative relationships in their lives, they tend to use that parameter there that I showed you in the regression before. They tend to use it less. So as you move along the spectrum of negative relationships, you would tend to put that likelihood in the judgment less and use other factors, and you get an even stronger effect if you have identity problems, which is quite interesting to see for me. And it was interesting to see that affective instability has nothing to do with it, and self-harm has nothing to do with it. Or so it seems from this preliminary, online experience with the task. So preliminary results confirm that borderline symptoms are associated with impairments in judgment moderation by mentalization. So establishing intentions. So severity in negative relationships and identity problems were the ones that were closely associated with less mentalized. The task needs some further refinement. We have to prove that the parameters are recoverable under the current number of trials and experimental conditions, and we need to distinguish between positive and negative prediction errors in modeling. Okay, we haven't done that yet. So in this case, you have a alpha prediction error that's measuring that, but it is known from literature, and I have personal experience with this, that prediction errors tend to be weighed differently in appetitive and aversive contexts. So we need to improve the modeling a little bit. And of course, we need to run this task in a clinical population. We have collaborators in London that are soon going to run this in a population of patients diagnosed with BPD, and it will be of great interest to deploy this task in a two-head setting, because right now Kai. Oh, by the way, I haven't talked about who Kai really is. So Kai is just an artificial intelligence that is actually benevolent, but just makes mistakes sometimes. Okay. And it's actually quite interesting to see that people infer malevolence from just noisy decision making. It's very interesting. But it will be of great interest to deploy this task in a two-head setting where you're actually playing with another person. Perhaps the other person is under time pressure, and so they will make mistakes. And so how are you going to handle those mistakes? Anyway, this was the card game. And
do you want to have some questions at this point? Or do you want to
yes, maybe it's better if we have some questions now on this, because this is now done. And then we're going to move to proxemics, which is completely different.
Probably I missed this part. All the participants were healthy subjects.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was an online population, and we had a spectral measure of severity of symptoms. So of course we only have we cannot say who they are.
Because I think a very interesting point is that there is a very high variability.
Yeah.
And a big problem with theory of mind tests generally is that they are generally created for children. So when you use these tests with adults, they are good for discriminating clinical and non-clinical population, but generally the healthy adults tend to get the higher points, so the ceiling effect. And while it seems that in this kind of task you could really get very different performance.
Yes.
So very different response profiles. That is.
Yeah. Well, we have our sometimes stereotyped responses of people that only respond 0, 100, or whatever. But all in all, I would say I'm satisfied with how went in the current state of the task. Also satisfied with the breadth of variation in the symptoms, in severity of the symptoms. It's probably not a good sign, but a lot of people that you find online tend to score quite high on these questionnaires. And I have to say, I found more people scoring higher when I didn't look into master workers on MTurk. So when I started getting data from non-master workers, I started getting a little bit higher symptoms of.
So, what was the proportion of people who would, just on the basis of this, be in the clinical range?
So in my experience working with the dancing test number 1, where I had experience with data, around 36 of the cumulative score across the 4 subscales was when you started getting clinical borderline personality disorder diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And here, let's go and look. We can see it from we should be able to see it from the plots, right? Oh no, we have the subscales here. But anyway, you can, well, yeah, I cannot just sum them up.
The same people scoring high.
But there are people that definitely go about 36. I mean, 3 or 4 out of 35 did.
Are you thinking about some kind of external validation? I mean, trying to see if the performance is related to other more classical theory of mind assessment tools, or to other, I don't know, personality traits or whatever, because again, it seems really interesting to characterize healthy population that is generally missing for classical theory of mind.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We should get some kind of other type of validation with other more classical tasks. In London, when this is going to be deployed in London, they're going to have a whole battery of tasks. I'm going to ask if it is in their mind to include something theory of mind related.
It's a super interesting task.
Thanks.
It's a bit of a pity. We had one of our colleagues who worked on social cognition in schizophrenia was here for the previous workshop.
Yeah.
Did you also find this, or?
Yeah, I saw her. But,
okay, so you should get in touch with her
yes.
while you're here, because they do a lot of tasks on people with schizophrenia, trying to examine which kind of social cognition deficits might they have. And I think what seems to be quite interesting in this task here is specifically looking for evil intentions in the other, right? Which seems to be, because normally when you are talking about mentalizing deficits, that would be the idea that you just don't even begin to take the perspective of the other. But in this borderline personality, as you describe it, it seems to be more a matter of, in a sense, assuming that the other is up to no good, which is quite different from not having a theory of mind or not being mentalizing, because it seems to be mentalizing in a very particular framework, right? It seems to push you towards some kind of maybe also paranoia, or interpreting any action as being the outcome of an intent, but an evil intent. Right? Yeah. And I think that I haven't thought about that particular version of it before, but that's very interesting. Yeah. And in a sense, what you're offering in the task is then a possibility to demonstrate that there is no evil intent because the person could do no other. Which again is different from the classical mentalizing, which is to say, you can't understand that anyone could be different from you or be thinking something differently. While here, the task seems to be on the borderline personality, assumption seems to be whatever that person is doing, it's based on evil intentions. And what you're actually showing by allowing them to see the set of choices is for them to discover, that they couldn't do anything else.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's very interesting. I don't think it's a lack of mentalizing, but it's a correction to a negative interpretation of the intentions of the other that you're sort of offering. And I think that's really interesting, but I haven't seen anything like that before. Would that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. There's well, I mean, the task connected with a descriptive modeling approach, like it is now. You can disentangle, for instance, whether you have just a general bias towards judging others as hostile or friendly, but yeah, you can disentangle that from just the use of the likelihood in the judgment, and you can relate all these coefficients together. You're gonna get a set of coefficients for each subject, and that will tell you how negatively biased they are, how much they used mentalizing in this task, putatively, obviously. But according to our operationalization, and so I think what we want to aim to do is to disentangle these factors. What we find is definitely that the further you go up the spectrum of the severity score, the less you use this likelihood to impact on your judgment, and the more you're just gonna go on the negative side of the judgment of hostility.
So in a sense, even if you can see that the person had no choice.
Yes, what's interesting is that it's skewed.
Yeah.
You actually give them the chance to see. And
But those
still,
in the spectrum will not take that into account.
Yeah, still not used. Which is what the theory posits, right? I mean, if you just can't wear someone else's pants, I can tell you what their situation they were in was, but they're just gonna be.
But you will still hurt in the same.
Yeah, it will still hurt. When designing this, I was kind of reasoning on the assumption that these are separate components in the brain somehow. They don't interrelate normatively as you would expect, but there's just a part of you that just considers the outcome of things. It's a bit like in the model-free, model-based distinction of things. There's going to be a balance of that, and if you're just considering things for what they are, not thinking about them, model-free, then what you care is just about the balance of the outcome, rather than what's behind it, the model. Yeah. Whatever generated it.
Yeah, and it also, it sort of gives a nice illustration of the fact that, the clinical population of borderline patients that you have in studies like these is overwhelmingly female. But they say that's just because the male borderliners, they tend all to be in prison. That's what happens when you always infer evil intent and then take measures.
But it's also because we have another group of people who work on autistic children, on the spectrum, and they are developing kind of collaborative tasks for autistic children. And of course, the standard assumptions would be, they will not be able to enter into collaborative relationships because they cannot mentalize and they cannot create relations. And what they are discovering, and they might be worthwhile for you to talk to as well, is that so they have to build things in Lego together, and they seem to be perfectly able, in a sense, to share mental models and to construct stuff together. But they do it in ways that their therapy or their facilitator doesn't get what they're up to. So it's certainly not, they have a theory, they're able to co-construct these joint actions together. And there is no assumptions of evil intent. If anything, there's too little of it. But so they would, and therefore they would very rapidly align with each other in ways they don't need to talk about it because it's already settled. And they have made some very beautiful conversation analysis where the therapist is saying, "Oh, you need to come up and agree on a shared goal before you can start." And it turns out that they agreed on that a long time ago. And since they agreed on it, they don't need to talk about it any longer. And it's only when they did a very careful analysis they could show that the person who didn't get the situation was actually their facilitator, right? Because she was trying to push them to externalize a model that they had, in a sense, already discovered with each other. So, which is again a very different form of mentalizing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what you're describing here is a kind of very inability to see anything. There is intentions, first of all, and is an evil intention, which is a very kind of interesting setup.
And these are two autistic children playing together?
Yes.
Or, yeah. Okay.
Three actually.
Three.
Yeah, a group of three. There is. Yeah, it's
It's taking place at a school for autistic children, so they're doing this in lots of schools.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
It's Ella. She's just upstairs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. She go because and they were working on the assumption, you know, they can't mentalize, hence they cannot create transactions, they cannot collaborate because they can't create the shape model. And it turns out they're perfectly fine in doing that. But it's difficult to see because it doesn't work at that level of explicitly working on intention. So I think, anyway, very cool.
Thanks, yeah, it's very interesting.
I also had a minor comment to this,
Sure.
but I can also wait if you prefer to move on.
Well, no, if
So
you
it
want
was
to.
about this comment that that they don't seem to want to take into account this extra review of the situation.
Yeah.
Right, and I was interested to see how it actually looked like in the real task, because
Sure.
it could be one or two options, right? So option one is that they see it, they are able to infer what happened from this review of the situation and decide not to take it into account, right?
Yeah.
The other option is that that first they do the task, and then they have to remember the chosen options. It disappears, right? And then they see the actual situation, but it's displaced from the first situation. You have to keep that in memory, and I noted when you went through it, you also said, I think it was a red triangle.
Yeah, that's true.
Yellow triangle, and maybe it's also just very hard to do this inference.
Absolutely.
In the task, we're doing lots of trials, and you have to depend on your working memory at the same time.
Yeah, no. In the task, you see your hint card. That's a very good point, and I realized early on that this could have been a weakness, so I didn't want it to depend on working memory at all. And so they see the hint card that they sent, and they see the hand in the same page.
Right, so
if we have time, I'm going to show you the task. I really want to because, obviously, but it's been 45 minutes. But yes, they see the hint card and they see the draw from Kai at the same time. At the same time, so they can see, look, I sent this. This is similar to this, not to this, and therefore.
I need to run.
No problem.
But yes, great. How long are you here for?
Until
Friday.
Yeah.
Including Friday.
Including Friday. Yeah, we can chat more.
Yeah. Thanks, Andres.
At this point, it's going to be just very briefly going into the dancing task, but it's just that it's good to talk more about the mentalizing card game because I worked a little bit more on it. The dancing task is literally just very preliminary analysis, and it's more to show you what the paradigm is and what the goal behind it is. Dancing task 2.0. So dancing task provides a simple paradigm to study the appraisal of interactions in which proxemics are the only channel of communication. So proxemics is the study of body language. So you just don't talk at all, and you just base your interpretation of the other's intentions on how they're moving towards you. Obviously, in real life, it's much more complicated than that because it's not just about how close we are or how far apart we are. It's about how we look at each other, what we do in response to certain things. But really, in this case, is going to be the simplest instance of that because people are going to be using avatars to dance with another avatar. The other avatar is controlled by the computer. It's controlled by the experimenter, and the key thing about the task is mapping borderline symptoms onto a proxemics vocabulary. So what does it mean to have borderline personality disorder? What does it imply in terms of the appraisal of body language? And what happens in the dancing task, so you have rounds of dancing between subject and partners, which are simple geometric shapes, like I said, in which if they touch, partners have the opportunity to add or subtract a certain amount, $0.25 from the subject's bonus. For me, this was the simplest embodiment of what it means to trust someone and what it means. So touching is obviously, touching someone indicates closeness, but it really is an act of trust in this task, because if you touch the other shape, you allow them to give or take away from you. So you could get a positive interaction and they give you something, or they can take away from you. Just like in real life, I like to think. I mean, it's not the most ecological paradigm in the world because you're still using geometric shapes. Obviously that's needed for mapping your own priors onto the task, but it resembles a lot what real life is about. So what happens and how are these partner shapes programmed? So it's very simple. In the task, let's say you're this yellow circle. I always choose the yellow circle when I play this task. If you're this yellow circle, you might choose to, you start the interaction, you have 1 minute to interact with the other shape and decide if you like them or not enough to touch them and to allow them to give or take from you. So let's say now I click here and I move by this radius, and this green triangle has an opportunity to choose what they want to do with me. If they want to follow me, they want to move away from me. There's a very simple vocabulary of behaviors. So if I move away from you, you can move towards or far away from me. That depends on you. And how does it depend on the different parts that we have in the task? So we have an anxious type of partner that whenever I approach them, they will approach me. And whenever I move away from them, they also very likely to approach me. So imagine you kind of indicate that you want to be distant from someone, but they still come for you. I remember when Chris played this task, he was quite annoyed with the anxious part. Then there's the avoidant partner. When you approach them, they are unlikely to approach you, and when you move away from them, they just will never approach you, okay? So that's someone that you're basically just only going to see that they're going to move away from you most of the time. A mirroring partner is one that they will approach you if you approach them, they will avoid you if you avoid them. It's kind of very respectful, no noise there at all. And random partner just does whatever they like. And that's interesting to see what you interpret something random as being, right? Here though, I will show you the task because it's very important. I don't know if you can see. So this is Dancing Task 2.0. It's available online on cognition.run. So first of all, you insert your name. I'm just gonna say Federico here. This is just instructions to the task, but it's more or less what I've said so far. We also give them a little example of what the dance can look like. We really stress that if they touch, they can, the other shape can add or subtract 0.25 from the bonus amount. Here you have to answer these questions to, I know the answers, but don't tell anyone. And let's go. So like I said, I like to be a yellow circle. This time I'm going to be a green circle. This is just a preliminary screen. Okay, so let's say I want to approach this guy, see what he does. Okay, a little further away. Don't know why they did that. Okay. I don't know if I trust this guy. So basically right now, as I'm dancing with this guy, I have to decide whether I trust them or not, whether their intention is to give me something. This guy seems pretty random to me. Obviously now that you know everything about the task is a little bit difficult, but so I'm just trying to approach them. Another parameter in this task is the radius of the response. So this kind of gives me a predictability level for the for their motion, and because if I get the grasp that whatever I do in terms of range of motion is going to be reflected, that makes the partner more predictable. Instead, if they just respond to my move with a move that can be huge or small, that makes them a lot more unpredictable, even in terms of how I should risk approaching them, because they could touch me even if I don't want them to touch me. Did you intend to touch this person? I would say I was undecided here. Another question that they're asked is, what do you think this person would have done if you attached to your bonus? So this is where we ask people to imagine what would have happened in case they didn't touch. But if they touch, obviously this part is removed. And the question is, what do you think they will do to your bonus? People are not told what happens to their bonus amount trial by trial, because we don't, for now, we don't want any temporal dependency effects of what happened in the previous with the previous partners. We just want to measure what happens. And here they do a little bit of a questionnaire, which kind of resembles a mood inventory, but filled about the other person. But it's just about the general impression that we have about the other person. So how calm they were, how I trusted them, they were caring, they wanted to be far from me. This is also questions to understand if they're paying attention, some of them. This is another guy. I'd just like you to see if someone is okay, so this guy has approached me. See, okay, so I can kind of see that they approach me all the time. So now if I'm optimistic, I could think that Flynn wants to give me money and touch me. But I could also think that they will take money from me if they touch me. So this is where expectations and prior expectations about this stuff come into play. So let's say I want to test Flynn and see what they do if I go away. So Flynn respected that. I don't know. I mean, I'm just telling you my impression when I'm going. I like that. But if the partner is anxious, they're just gonna move on me no matter what. Okay, so Flynn is pretty much doing whatever I do, so that's good. I didn't touch them, but I would say that I would have touched them. So I'm just gonna go here, and I think they would have given me some 0.25. So this is just to give you an impression. So we get all these measures, okay? We get measures about our appraisal of the interaction, what we think would have happened, or what we think ultimately happens when we touch. And this is what the task is about. So it's just iterating rounds of this. So let's just go back here. The main result that we get from this task, and then we're done. So again, population online, and it's not the same population as the other task. But we get a striking effect of wanting to approach the avoidant personality type. So I've actually replayed the trials that were played online. I can do it through the data because I record all the movements. And what I could see was that some people, when the partner was moving away, they also moved away. So they just kind of said, okay, you want to distance yourself, I will distance myself too. Some others, they were kind of going after them. And with the questionnaire, we can also kind of see what's driving that behavior. And higher scores on the borderline spectrum means that you have more intention to touch the avoidant partner, also somewhat the random partner, but there is no relationship with the unbiased and anxious. So this will survive any correction. So I'm not even reporting p-values here. This is very strong, but obviously we have an online population. We have a limited number of subjects, so still must be treated with a pinch of salt, this result, but it's very striking. So the higher scoring on borderline severity of symptoms, the more you're gonna go for the avoidant to touching the avoidant partner. And I didn't say that before, but fear of abandonment is such a big factor in borderline personality disorder. So people with borderline personality disorder diagnosis, they will invest massive efforts in avoiding real or even imagined abandonment, when they think partners are going to leave them, or when partners leave them, they'll go to any effort to avoid that, because it's a very painful experience. And when asked about the outcome prediction from the touch, if it would have happened, so hypothetical or factual, somewhat surprisingly, but also consistently with the fact that they wanted to touch the partner, they report that if they touched, they would have given them money after touching. Still have to completely make sense of this result, but it resonates with what we know in such a simple task, which is in itself, I think, quite satisfactory. So we just report a strong direct relationship between the total of the personal assessment interview borderline scales, and the subjects reported ratings that indicate an intention to approach the partner that moves away from them, whilst predicting that they will give the money if they touched. This result is in line with what I just said, so efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Modeling of this task, we want to model this task on a move-by-move basis, if it's possible. So trying to predict whether the move is going to be an approaching move or a distancing move of the subject based on the history of the dance. The modeling of the task will allow us to study the evolution of a representation of the partner's intentions, or the value that assigned to the action of touching the partner, to this act of trust, which will be evolving across individual, self, and other actions within the dance. The overall conclusions from showing these two tasks is that these tasks would allow us to computational phenotype behavior and discriminate various ways in which BPD can arise, and without recurring to questionnaires, which is such an important thing. The card game, for instance, can in principle allow us to disentangle overall negativity bias, strong interpersonal sensitivity, or mentalizing deficits and the symptoms that pertain to each. The dancing task can offer insight into the prior expectations that compound the appraisal of social interaction. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Thanks.